is the same.
All the blood we shed before. Did you ever stop to notice?
If you listen carefully to Michael Jackson's music over a long period of time, something starts to stand out that's hard to explain at first. Not with one song, not even with one album, but when you move across years, across moods, across styles. The songs don't rely on trends. They don't rely on production tricks that age out. They feel stable, like they were built to last, not just to impress in the moment. A lot of artists from the same era sound locked into their time. The drums give them away, the synths give them away, the reverb gives them away. With Michael, that doesn't really happen. Even when the sounds are clearly from the 80s, the music itself still feels present. And that's not because it's nostalgic. It's because of how it was constructed. Michael Jackson had a very strict internal rule about music. He never framed it as a rule publicly, but everyone who worked with him felt it. No sound was allowed to exist just to hide another sound. No part was allowed to lean on the rest of the song to make sense. Every element had to make sense on its own. That way of thinking didn't come out of nowhere. When Michael was younger, especially during the later Jackson's period, he was already frustrated with how crowded and overproduced things could feel. He wanted clarity. He wanted movement. He wanted songs that felt physical, not decorative. When he started working closely with Quincy Jones, that instinct finally had a partner who understood it. Quincy didn't come from pop. He came from jazz, from orchestration, from film. In those worlds, you learn very quickly that unnecessary sound kills emotion. If something doesn't move the feeling forward, it becomes noise. From the very beginning of their collaboration, the studio process was different. They didn't build songs by stacking layers and polishing them later. They built them by constantly pulling things away. Tracks were muted all the time, not during mixing, during writing, during arrangement, during recording sessions. Michael's time Thriller was being made, this approach had become extreme. Thriller didn't become great because of how much was added to it. It became great because of how much was rejected. Entire ideas were written, recorded, and removed. Not because they were bad, but because they didn't clearly earn their place. Michael was very sensitive to anything that felt lazy. Long, sustained notes that didn't change, pads that existed just to fill space, background layers you'd never notice on their own. Those sounds bothered him, even if they sounded pleasant. That's why the arrangements feel so alert. Take the bass lines. In many pop songs, the bass exists to support harmony. It fills the low end and stays out of the way. In Michael's music, the bass line is often one of the main voices. It moves. It has shape. It creates tension and release independently. That's why you can mute the vocal in a song like Billie Jean and still feel completely grounded. You don't feel lost. The bass tells you where you are. It tells you when something is about to change. It keeps the song alive even in isolation. The drums work the same way. They aren't neutral timekeepers, they're expressive. Quincy Jones talked about how drums in Michael's songs were treated almost like lead instruments. The groove itself had to be memorable. If you couldn't recognize the song from the drums alone, something was missing. Michael pushed this idea further than almost anyone else by extending it to his voice. His voice wasn't treated as something floating above the track. It was treated as part of the rhythm section. He phrased with precision. He cut words short. He left space intentionally. Even his long notes aren't relaxed. There's tension inside them, timing inside them. The non-lyrical sounds mattered just as much. The breaths, the small vocal noises, the little sounds between phrases. Those weren't accidents captured by a hot mic. Michael would record takes just to capture texture. No lyrics, just sound. Those recordings would then be edited and placed into the track with intention, like drum hits. That's why those sounds feel glued into the groove. They don't feel ornamental, they feel structural. This approach extended to every instrument. Strings didn't exist to create atmosphere. When strings came in, they moved. They had rhythm. They entered and exited with purpose. They didn't sit in the background holding long notes just to make things feel emotional. Guitars followed the same logic. Instead of smooth, flowing chords, you hear scratches, stabs, interruptions. Sounds that appear and disappear, sounds that create tension instead of comfort. Synths were treated with the same discipline. In the 80s, synths were often used to wash sound across the track. Long pads, constant presence. Michael's productions avoided that. Synths were precise. They came in, said something, and left. That's why his songs never feel foggy. You can almost draw a mental diagram of where every sound lives. This clarity didn't come from simplicity. It came from control. Another major part of this is how much Michael trusted space. Silence mattered to him. Not dramatic silence, but tiny gaps. Short dropouts. Moments where something disappears for a fraction of a second. Those moments create anticipation. They make the next sound land harder. They keep the groove from feeling mechanical. Most producers are afraid of silence because it feels risky. Michael wasn't. He trusted the listener. He tested everything physically. He danced constantly in the studio. Not to perform, to feel timing. If something didn't feel right in his body, it didn't matter how good it sounded on speakers. It wasn't done. There are many stories of Michael stopping sessions over details most people wouldn't notice. A sound pulling focus, a groove feeling slightly stiff. Not wrong, stiff. That distinction mattered deeply to him. This way of working is tiring, mentally and emotionally. That's why most artists don't do it for long. Michael also wasn't sentimental about ideas. He didn't protect parts because they took time. Entire sections would be removed late in the process. Not because they were bad, because they didn't contribute clearly enough. He wasn't attached to effort. He was attached to clarity. As his career moved into the bad era, budgets increased and expectations grew. The temptation to go denser was real. Bigger studios, more technology, more tracks. Michael resisted that pull. The songs became sharper and more aggressive, but the rules stayed intact. Nothing hid. Smooth Criminal is a perfect example. Even stripped down mentally, the song moves. Sounds don't all compete at once. One element steps forward, another responds. The ear is guided naturally. Even when there's a lot happening, it never feels crowded. Hooks played a big role in this. Michael didn't think in terms of one hook per song. He thought in moments. He wanted listeners to latch onto small details without realizing it. A drum fill that happens once. A bass movement that never repeats. A sound right before the chorus that disappears forever. Those moments stick because they're intentional and rare. That's why people remember textures and transitions decades later. The groove, the look. That part is easy. Copying the discipline is not. Because the discipline forces honesty. Every sound gets questioned. Does this work alone? Does it still make sense if everything else disappears? Most artists don't want to live with that question. The answers can be uncomfortable. Michael asked it constantly. That rule didn't stop at the records. It shaped the performances. His live shows followed the same principles. Clear rhythm, clear accents, clear space. Nothing muddy, nothing accidental. That's why his live performances feel controlled without feeling stiff.